And to shed more light on this, we have the pleasure to have with us over the phone our dear guest, Dr. Amr Hamid, Professor of Economics. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Well, Dr. Hamid, how is the current escalation affecting the global oil prices and financial markets in particular terms?
Let's focus on Africa and the immediate economic impact of global tensions on Africa has three aspects. First is the oil, and then energy, and then the markets. Let's take the first aspect, which is oil price volatility, of course. Global tensions around strategic energy choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, through which a large share of global oil and LNG flows continue to risk supply delays and higher risk premiums embedded in prices, of course. And this will no doubt push the Brent and related benchmarks higher and higher. And then another point here is that the disruptions, or even the perception of disruptions, tend to drive risk premia into crude markets, thus raising prices even before physical shortages materialize, which directly, of course, is going to raise import bills for net fuel importers. As far as the inflationary pressures are concerned, of course, higher global energy prices will translate into elevated transportation production and utility costs across not only Africa, but let's say the whole, even Europe and even Asia. Well, because I'm focusing on Africa because it is a continent where many economies remain heavily reliant on imported refined products like diesel and gasoline. And then last year, we can also mention that the fiscal balances effects for oil importing countries, higher global prices, no doubt is going to negatively affect trade deficits and curtail fiscal space.
Yes. To what extent also you spoke about Africa's economy, but the rising of the fuel prices and also the shipping costs, we'd like to shed more light on this point.
Yeah, the shipping disruptions and rising transportation costs, of course, it is going to imply some number of mitigations. The implications, for example, the shipping disruptions, particularly near the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, they have forced rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope, of course, I mean the very south of Africa, adding thousands of nautical miles to voyages and increasing freight rates and insurance costs. Also of equal importance is the higher freight rates directly affect the cost of imports and exports for many African economies, raising prices for basic goods and industrial inputs. As far as the economic effects, they would include increased costs for food imports and also for fertilizers and industrial components, which often represent large portions of consumer baskets in Africa and in Asia and even in Europe. The pressure on foreign exchange reserves as more dollars are spent on shipping and import bills. We can also mention here the competitive disadvantages for African exports, especially the bulk commodities that have a low per unit value. From a mitigation strategy standpoint, let's start first with the diversified supply chains. I mean here broaden sourcing beyond the shock point, which is dependent routes and suppliers, and then also the regional logistics hubs by develop alternative transport corridors, of course, and the strategic stockpiles. And here I mean governments can build strategic reserves of key fuels and food staples to buffer short-term shocks. Finally, we should also refer to the insurance and hedging frameworks. And here I mean expand the capacity for risk sharing and freight cost hedging through regional financial instruments.
Yes, Dr. Hamid, of course, we don't know how long would the war continue, or when would it stop. But if it stops now, can we see a pressure on Africa, prolonged pressure on Africa, or the pressure is going on only when the war is going on? Is it going to, the pressure going to stop with the war, or we are going to see prolonged pressure on Africa and other states?
In a nutshell, there is always a time lag. So yes, it's not going to stop on the spot, of course, but there will always be a time lag, especially with the less developed countries of Africa. It is not going to adjust quickly like European countries, for example, and even if we speak about the developing countries, because as you know, in Africa there are only 3 or 4 big economies, I mean from on an African standard. And here I mean, of course, Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa. These are the countries that can maybe pick up a little bit, but there will always be a time lag. But the rest of the African countries, let's say at least, if we assume that the war is going to stop today, they will need at least 6 to 12 months to adjust.
Yes. What is the way out? How should oil importing African countries manage the risk of the higher energy bill? What is the options in front of them? What is the way out of this? Any alternatives, I mean?
Well, I think what you mean here is how the countries, the African countries, can leverage for renewable energy and regional gas to reduce choke point vulnerabilities. And to answer this question, of course, number one is to try to reduce import dependence by expanding solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal capacity across Africa, which can gradually reduce reliance on diesel generators and imported fuels, dampening exposure to global price shocks. Also, from a gas development as a transition fuel, Africa has large natural gas resources, for example, in East, North, and West Africa, that can no doubt serve as a transitional energy source, reducing dependence on global crude flows through narrow maritime choke points. And we should also mention the regional LNG hubs and pipeline networks, which can promote energy trade within Africa and less sensitive to global shock point disruptions. If you want also from a strategic infrastructure investment, distributed generation like solar grids, mini grids, and so on, this will enhance energy security for remote and rural areas. And then investments in storage, that's very important, and interconnectivity, which should reduce vulnerability to single route disruptions. Last but not least is the policy frameworks, and here I mean encourage renewable energy, buy-in with feed-in tariffs, investment guarantees, of course, and public-private partnerships. To promote regional gas utilization strategies that also prioritize domestic and regional industrial use over export-only models.
Yes. Dr. Hamid, how are the African currencies and stock markets reacting compared to the major global markets?
As you know, the African currencies in general are very much volatile vis-a-vis European currencies, or even the dollar or the Japanese yen, or the vehicle countries of the world. So what I expect here is that there should be like fiscal and monetary policy tools to preserve the African countries from being so volatile. But I mean here by fiscal and monetary policy, prudent reserve management, like build and protect foreign exchange reserves to cushion external shocks, of course, and then counter cyclical fiscal buffers which will save windfalls during boom periods to support spending during downturns. And inflation targeting, that's very important. Central banks may tighten or adjust policy to defend the price stability against imported inflation. And last but not least is the debt and credit controls, and here the prudent debt management to avoid unsustainable external financing. Having mentioned all these aspects, then the structural reforms could be somehow established through strengthening tax administration and enhancing public investments and regional financial cooperation, and the promotion of regional macroeconomic surveillance to share early warnings and policy responses.
Yes. Could this moment push faster economic diversification across the continent?
Well, I mean, let's first worry about the war that is taking place before we really go into what's going to happen afterwards.
Yes. Would this result in diversity of economies? Each state or each country is going to have its own problems concerning economy?
As I said, the situation as it is right now is very unpredictable. There is a lot, what we call in economics, there is a lot of uncertainties. So let's first, exactly, let's first worry about the uncertainties, and then we can start thinking about economic diversification. Yes. Of course, economic diversification is very key for the success of any economy, and by economic diversification, I mean horizontal expansion, which is sectoral expansion. So the country should have, the economy should have like a horizontal different sectors, like industries, like agriculture, like tourism, like IT, like information, like services. All these are horizontal. And then after the horizontal diversification, there should also be what we call the vertical expansion or the vertical diversification. So to answer your question, yes, it's very important, but there should be a country will, an economic will, in order to achieve the horizontal and the vertical diversification.
Yes, this would bring us to a very important point, Dr. Hamid, which is the readiness of each country for any challenges that could happen in order to face all the challenges concerning its economy.
Yeah, but that's what I just said now, that it all depends on the willingness of the country.
Yes.
Exactly, that's very important. The most important is to establish confidence in the economy. And if we're still speaking about
to be resilient,
Sorry?
To be resilient in order to attract any challenges or shocks, I mean.
Yeah, but if we're still speaking about the African countries, it will differ from, as I said, the comparatively big African countries that I mentioned earlier, or the medium-sized or the poorer African countries. What is always most important is to establish confidence.
Yes.
The secret is to establish confidence, because this is the only way to attract foreign direct investment into any African country, and at the same time promote the flow of funds from, external funds from the developed world, like Europe, for example, or the big Asian economies, into the African countries.
Yes. Despite going on war, some countries or some people, in the market take benefit of this, of any war, and could survive with the economy. What are the opportunities despite any crisis or any war that is going on?
again, there is a sub-field in economics which is called war economy.
Yes.
So a war economy, there is always a lot of countries that lose, of course, but at the same time, some countries can win, either in the long term or in the short term. I mean, Europe now wouldn't have been what it is without the Second World War. So the Second World War, which was detrimental to all Europe, but it made Europe move into what it is right now. So this is the first aspect of it. If you are speaking about what's happening now between America/Israel on one hand and Iran on the other hand, of course, Iran is suffering a lot, and Israel is suffering a lot, and America is somehow marginally suffering also. But let's take a country like Egypt, which is yes, today maybe the stock exchange in Egypt is negatively affected slightly. That's true. The exchange rate is also negatively affected slightly. But my assessment is that this war represents a great opportunity for Egypt from an economic standpoint, especially in the real estate sector, which has been sleeping, if I may say, the last 2 or 3 years in Egypt. But now with the influx and inflow of people coming from the Gulf area and buying in Egypt, that could represent an upturn in not only in the real estate sector of Egypt, but in the whole economy. So,
yes.
So the war might of course, it has its negatives, but at the same time, it could be an opportunity for some other countries.
Yes, Dr. Hamid, how can Africa leverage its renewable energy potential and regional gas developments in order to reduce reliance on critical maritime checkpoints and also strengthen long-term energy security?
Yeah, well, Africa has a lot of advantages from an energy standpoint. First of all, because of the deserts that exist in the northeast of Africa, I mean extending from Egypt in the northeast till Algeria, for example, and then going even to the heart of Africa, Sudan, and so on, and all these African countries. This represents a great source of solar energy. So yes, of course, that's an opportunity for the energy expansion in Africa. And then if you look at the western shores of all Africa, that's another excellent opportunity for wind energy as well. That's besides other sources that could also be the traditional sources of energy that exist in some of the other countries, like oil in Algeria, for example, and so on.
Yes. Also, the measures that not only African countries, but countries in the region who are affected by the war, the measures that the countries should take in order to face the challenges of war impacting its economy.
3 measures mainly: how to achieve economic development or economic growth, and how to control inflation, and how to fight unemployment. These are the 3 important measures that any country should actually aim to achieve. In this respect, let me go back to what I mentioned earlier. What is very important is to establish confidence in the system through a very solid and strong judicial/legal financial framework and banking framework. This is very important because this is the only way to establish domestic confidence in the economy. And when the domestic business circle trusts the economy, then the foreign direct investment will follow. So it starts from inside. And the only way is to try I'm speaking about Africa in general now, is to try to reduce and control corruption in the African economies. So if you manage to fight to reduce and fight, because corruption exists everywhere, even in Europe. But it's maybe, we speak about triple or even more than triple the size of corruption that exists in the African countries. So if you fight corruption and establish these three benchmarks of the economy, again, development, inflation, and unemployment, fighting unemployment, then the country or the economy will be on the right track.
Yes. Doctor, concerning the effect on importing and exporting for oil and fuel from Africa and into Africa, the impact of the war, of course, on it.
Africa traditionally is not one of the main countries when it comes to energy exports. Africa is more an energy importer because, as you know, the influx of energy around the world, it comes from the Middle East, I mean the Gulf area, Saudi Arabia, and then from the other side of the world, Venezuela, and so on. But from an African standpoint, there is only Algeria which has a lot of reserves of oil. Egypt with the very high population, 110 million or even more, so even if we have some reserves of energy, but we still import. So bottom line, Africa is a net consumer of energy. So the idea is the renewable energy. That's very important. Renewable and this energy, is, the renewable energy, it represents, of course, an opportunity for the African countries.
Yes, this brings us to a very important thing, which is the sustainable economy, the importance of building a sustainable economy in the job opportunities, in, as you've said, the economic development. What's your comment?
So what's the question, please?
What's your comment on the importance of sustainable economy?
As I mentioned earlier, a sustainable economy is an economy that has an ongoing growth rate or development rate for a number of years to follow. It does not have to be, it could even be a deficit-oriented growth. So it doesn't have to be a surplus-oriented growth. For maybe you'll be surprised when I tell you that one of the biggest economy in the world, which is America, is a deficit-oriented growth. So that's why the issue of the debts and so on is not really a challenge. Of course, we have to reduce it as much as we can, but the idea is not to continue to have debt for a long time. But a country can always have debt for 4, 5, 6 years, but at one point in time, it has to be cleared and go back to normal. So that's one thing. So nothing wrong with being a deficit-oriented growth. Another model is maybe if you want to compare two of the biggest 5 economies on earth, like America again and Japan. So the growth model of America is a consumer-oriented growth. So the more you consume, the more you grow as a country. Japan is not like this. Japan is a savings-oriented growth. So the more you save, the more you grow. And both models are, there is nothing wrong with both of them. Both of them are acceptable, and both of them represent growth. Let me mention here that let's identify the difference between growth and development. When I say growth, then I'm speaking in numeric terms. So per capita income, for example, is a growth parameter. GDP, GNP is a growth parameter. Balance of trade is a growth parameter. But what concerns development is the qualitative parameter, not the quantitative parameter. Growth is quantitative, but development is qualitative. So, for example, qualitative like what? Like the number of schools, for example, the number of hospitals in the country, the consumption of water, which means that the people are taking more showers, So it's more or less like a quality parameter. So that's why we should not only concentrate on growth, but also on the qualitative aspect, which is the development aspect.
Yes, Dr. Hamid, Africa is a rich country, rich with its natural resources and other sources. How can Africa make use of this natural resources in exchange for energy and oil?
Education and health. That's what Africa is missing. Education and health. And both of them, because it's the least educated country in the whole world, Africa in general, with very few exceptions. And health, as you know, the health is, I would even go to the extreme of saying it's destroyed in Africa. And both of them, they generate from corruption in the governing institutions.
Yes. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your valuable information, Dr. Amr Hamid, the Professor of Economics. We really had the pleasure to have this phone with you. Ladies and gentlemen, a short break and I'm going to be back with you.